Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, all of you got a chance to see and hear from Nikesh. What a fun session. Well, we have an equally exciting session here coming up, and it's the home stretch. You have Anatoly in a little bit from Solana. You're going to hear about how crypto has created an ecosystem that is as large or larger than Microsoft or Google in a span of a few years. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about Foundation and this panel. For those of you who weren't there in the last couple of sessions, I'm Ashu Garg, a general partner at Foundation Capital. We're an early stage venture capital firm that have been around for 26 years with more than 30 public companies to our name. We primarily invest in fintech and enterprise, and within enterprise, everything from applications all the way through cybersecurity, dev tools, down to infrastructure. Most of the time we invest before there's revenues or even a product, so seed or Series A. Our goal is to invest in extraordinary dreamers and then help them realize those dreams. And so if any of you in the audience has a dream, please reach out to me or one of my partners at Foundation. But talking of extraordinary dreamers, I think we have two of them with us today. So let's dive into this panel. We have two exceptional technology leaders. I'll introduce Anshul and Raghu. Anshul is the CEO of Arista Networks, $35 billion market cap company and a leader in networking. Anshul started his career at Cisco, joined Arista in 2007 when it was just getting off the ground, probably had a few million or less in revenues, and has really sort of led the company since then, rising up the ranks to become COO in 2019. And in this capacity leads all of engineering and product across the company. In addition to Anshul, we have Raghu. Raghu is the CTO of LinkedIn, where he leads all of their platform and infrastructure engineering as well. And he's had several very senior technical leadership roles at both Zynga and PayPal. So Anshul and Raghu, thank you for joining me today.
Great. Thanks, Ashu.
We're going to talk about the infrastructure stack and how that's changing over the next decade. And so maybe, Raghu, we can start with you. Tell us a little bit about where do you see change coming from, what's driving it, and what are your top priorities?
Okay. Well, again, thanks for having me here. It's good to be on the panel. So my number one priority at this point is talent. Probably doesn't come as a surprise, but that's probably not what you're asking about. So from an execution standpoint, my number one priority right now is driving our migration from our on-prem data centers into Azure. This is something that we've had going on for the last 2.5 years or so. But from a forward-looking strategy standpoint, there are a few things that I spend time thinking about. And let me talk about a few of those. The first one is AI infrastructure and AI as a platform. So AI literally powers all parts of our company, like literally all parts of our company. And we have gotten to a point where we run most of our AI workloads on a shared platform, which is great. So any investments that we make in the platform literally lifts all boats, which is wonderful. But one thing that is very clear is the rate of evolution of AI workloads is faster than literally any other part of the technology stack today. So one thing I think about, and I don't have very clear answers for it quite yet, is what kind of infrastructure investments we as LinkedIn need to make today for supporting the kind of AI workloads that we know we will have 3 to 5 years from now. Infrastructure takes a while to build, so it's like gazing into a crystal ball. So that is something that we're spending quite a bit of time thinking about. Now, going just from infrastructure, thinking one layer above, we'd love to get to a point where we offer AI as a platform for our internal workloads. This is something that is becoming a norm in the industry. Like GPT-3 is offered as a service today, which is amazing. And individual use cases can customize it and fine-tune it for their specific use cases. We will need that for a variety of things, large models being one, but it'll be for a variety of things that we need to do for LinkedIn. So That in the AI and AI as a platform space. The next large bucket is what I broadly call data management. So we obviously sit on a mountain of data at LinkedIn, which is really high quality data, which is expanding and exploding in size every day. And we are at a point where we're still in a data lake mode. And I recently learned this phrase, data lakes are actually data swamps. Absolutely right. So strongly resonates with me, right? While we have done a good job in being responsible stewards of the data that our members and customers share with us, it is very, very important to us. I believe we need to come at it from a position where there is a lot more clarity on ownership and accountability of data sets. So for companies like ours, and this will be the case for literally any company in the world at any degree of scale, with increasing data sets and scale, ownership, accountability, management of compliance and privacy, all of these things will become table stakes. It'll become very, very important. But when you come at it from a position of compliance and privacy, that is playing defense, right? That is very, very uninteresting to me. Those things need to be guardrails, right? What I want is to maximize the power of data. Obviously, with the right guardrails in place, how do we provide powerful access to data across all our runtimes, online, nearline, and offline? How do we do that in a way where we are able to maximize the value of data, be it for data science or AI or you name it? So the goal there is really productivity and doing it in a way where we are able to do it in a compliant manner. So that's the second large bucket that I think about, data management.
Raghu, that's super helpful. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, the last one, I'll keep this quick.
No, go for it.
Yeah. The third one is convergence between the Lambda and Kappa stacks. So again, related to the AI workloads, our engineers spend way too much time writing code to run in our batch ecosystems and then duplicating it again for streaming ecosystems. There is enough work in the open source community for this already. We want to do this in a way that really, really scales for us, both with converged storage and with converged compute. So this is something that we are also thinking about. So I will pause with this.
Yeah, Raghu, these are three, actually four, including the cloud migration, broad topics we could spend an hour on. So I do want to come back to these four topics and drill into them a little bit more. But would love to, Anshul, to get your perspective. I mean, you are in such a unique position where you're both defining sort of the next generation infrastructure stack for yourself, but you also work with every one of the large cloud providers and some of the largest users of infrastructure like Facebook and Apple. What is it that you are seeing? What are the top three changes you are seeing occurring in the infrastructure stack?
Yeah, Ashok, first of all, love to see the passion Raghu has for data and data science. So you obviously are doing a great job at LinkedIn. When you look at the cloud companies, right, whether it's Microsoft or Google, Facebook, Apple, or any of the larger cloud companies, the amount of data they have, the amount of infrastructure they have, it's become so critical to the whole world that the number one priority for any cloud company is resiliency. We're so dependent on it. Amazon had an outage earlier this week, and there are all these newspaper articles about how people couldn't use their Roomba or feed their cats on time automatically using their apps. And someone said, they had to actually sweep the floor. They had forgotten how to do that.
Oh, it's so hard.
So, and this is obviously in a sort of humorous sense, but when you look at medical infrastructure relying on the cloud and emergency services, it becomes a matter of life and death. The service provider industry for 2 decades has driven this 5 nines mantra. I don't believe they've ever achieved it. It's always there on contracts and legal paperwork and so on. But the cloud is pretty close. And the way the cloud approaches this problem is, you can never build something monolithic that's going to achieve 5 nines. It's just not, it's a dream. But if you have a distributed architecture where you achieve 3 nines in a distributed way and combine these together, You can have resiliency that's distributed 4-way or 8-way. And each one is 3 nines, but the combined output is actually going to be better than 7 nines. You can do that, which is why the cloud is so far ahead. The amount of investment and thinking that goes into resiliency is huge. Every generation we discuss new architectures, you might think, the work is done. What else is there to do? We've built 100 megawatt data centers. And yet again, the moment you're done, the next project starts and you start from a clean sheet of paper. You're willing to throw away everything you've done from an architecture standpoint and say, what can I do to do it better next time? That passion for resiliency, I think, is huge. It will continue as a trend for many, many decades to come. And then you can't do enough, right? Because network or compute or storage in the end does have its own failure rates, so it can never be perfect. These two other things I would say. One is the scaling of the cloud and the cloud getting closer to the data and the users is a huge trend. In the past, cloud companies built data centers that were all 100 megawatt buildings and far away remote locations, hydroelectric dams, cheapest electricity and power and cooling and so on. But now they're connecting these to every exchange, whether it's an Equinix or a Meet Me Point in every metro, and good partnerships between service providers, edge community, enterprises, as well as the cloud as well. And as Raghu mentioned, AI is a huge trend in the cloud already, not just as a service they're offering for AI in the compute or cloud use cases, but own monetizing ads. You can get a far better outcome using AI technologies, learning every user's sort of behavior versus trying to do previous algorithms that weren't as efficient. So these are huge trends in the cloud. I think they'll drive a lot more innovation for the next 10 years.
Anshul, again, very large and sort of, I think, very rich veins that we could dig into in a lot more detail. So I'm going to bounce around some of these things and sort of would love to get answers from both of you. Maybe I'll pick on some of the areas, Raghu, you talked about. You talked about data management, and data management is a very unique challenge, especially with the balkanization of regulation. And on the one hand, as you said, being compliant, that's just table stakes. That's just good business hygiene. The question is, how do you do that, and at the same time, harness the power in a variety of ways that we're not doing today. So maybe you can dig in a little bit more and give one or two examples of where do you see opportunity, both for LinkedIn and for startups that might want to, learn from or work with LinkedIn.
Yeah, sure. When it comes to data, I think it all starts with the schema. Literally. I was using this as an example with one of my colleagues recently. When I joined PayPal, and in my early days, there used to be these data architects there. They used to have these 4 big screens, and they used to model relational schema. But back then, the amount of data that we used to deal with was tiny compared with the amount of data that we deal with now. I think what we really need is the ability to do that, to visualize the relationships between data, manage the aboutness of data, but at extreme scale with tens of thousands of data sets. We just don't do that. We just don't do that very well. So metadata and lineage is a big, big problem. And there are multiple solutions that are being worked on. We've built a couple ourselves. We open sourced them. And there are startups that are commercializing some of it. But it starts with that. So while you can have that degree of lineage, metadata management, etc., again, it comes down to accountability and ownership. That must be a cultural thing within an organization. Driving that is extremely important. Technology can help, can absolutely help. So that is one thing I'll say. From a regulatory standpoint, this is going to get very, very tricky, right? Because it is my guess, I guess, my belief that in a few years from now, a lot of infrastructure is going to be focused on regulation, right? A lot of it, privacy and regulation. Today, all infrastructure is AI infrastructure, which totally makes sense, right? I think that gets more and more commoditized. I think that'll be in the next few years. but we will be thinking a lot about regulatory infrastructure at extreme scale. And I think that is where things like decentralization could become interesting. So that is where you come from a position of strength and play offense with ideas like that. So yeah, data management, I think, is very, very rich. There's a lot to do there. And I think many companies to build there.
Yeah, no, so as you talked about distributed ledgers and using distributed approaches, do you see yourself using DLTs or some version of a blockchain to manage the PII data within LinkedIn? Is that tomorrow? Or is that 10 years away?
Too soon to tell, honestly, but I think it is very interesting. In a few cases, I'm not as well versed with everything in the Web3 world yet, or something that I'm passionate about. I want to learn a lot more about. But in a few cases, it feels like there are solutions searching for a problem. But when it comes to managing PII data, Ashu, to your point, I think it could be very, very interesting. This is where I think concepts of smart contracts could become very, very real. Yeah. Right? Companies like LinkedIn having smart contracts with people managing and owning their own data sets, with us getting a view into their data, with equitable exchange of value. We may get there, don't know yet.
Definitely an opportunity for innovation, I think, on all sides. Anshul, I want to connect something you said and something that Raghu said. He talked about the fact that LinkedIn is moving from their own data centers to Azure, and from what I recall, it's the largest cloud migration there is. Now, obviously,
should we welcome that because Microsoft is our largest customer?
so he's clearly going to generate lots of revenues for you. The question for you, Anshul, was obviously in Raghu's case, he's moving to Azure. Just given that it's LinkedIn, you work with multiple cloud providers, including Azure. What's your take on sort of how customers are converging? Are they converging around one cloud vendor? Will every other large company look like what Raghu is doing? Or do you really think that the multi-cloud world is the future?
Yeah, well, there's an assumption, Ashu, out there that everyone moves to the cloud. The question is one or many. What we are seeing some of our largest enterprise financial customers do is actually stay on-prem. The on-prem might not be the legacy stack. It's their private cloud. But when they do the analysis and you run things at scale and you have smart teams that are efficient, you can automate infrastructure and so on, you can actually, if you're at a large scale, let's say thousands of racks of infrastructure, you're better off doing it on your own versus being in the cloud because the cloud is still expensive, relatively speaking. Having said that, let's say you're a smaller company, you're a startup. I think you have no business of building your own physical infrastructure. You should only be in the cloud. And we've gone through this journey ourselves at Arista. We started in 2004. When I joined the company in 2007, we were deciding what to do. We picked being in the cloud, and every enterprise sort of infrastructure piece we have, other than our software development piece, which we need ourselves, everything else is in the cloud. So I think, and you can grow with that as well. Now, large enterprises have a lot of legacy stack. And there's a cost of moving into the cloud, and it's impractical because these apps were never designed for the cloud. They don't use any of the right libraries or the infrastructure offloads, and it's almost a waste of time. So you're better off leaving the legacy on-prem. If you can automate it and build it at scale in your own private cloud, that's great. Now, new app development can be done in the cloud, and that can be efficient. I think that will have to sort of draw the line. And then it comes down quite often to the religion within the companies, right? To visionary, do they want to invest in the future or not? Where I often see enterprises struggle is this a top-down approach without looking into any of this detail and sign a big contract. It's a multi-$100 million contract, and 3 years later they're crying about it, and then they try to move back. It's called the repatriation of data, which is a pretty big movement as well. Now, having said that, the cloud market, the TAM is huge. This is expected to be crossing $1 trillion soon. And between Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and then some of the tier 2 clouds that are still very strong, whether it's Oracle or IBM Software or SAP, and then some from China, that market is well covered. it's very hard for someone to enter now. You don't have the economies of scale to try and compete with these guys. So I think these cloud companies will sort of control the market. It's a huge entry cost, but it's highly competitive as well, which is fun for everyone. Most enterprises will split their business. They'll have some apps running in one place, some data set in one place, and everything else in a different place.
I think that's well said. We in the last session had this conversation with Nikesh Arora, and one of the things he said that, and they have real scale at Palo Alto. He said in the last 3 years, they've moved 100% to the public cloud. And he said, look, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually marginally more expensive. It's not dramatically more expensive, marginally more expensive. But the benefits are not cost. They're really around agility and the reduced need for internal headcount. Like, it's the ability to outsource so much of the operational stuff that you would have to sort of hire. And given that hiring is the number one challenge these days for tech companies, they've outsourced that problem to Google and Amazon and Microsoft.
There is an opportunity cost, right? So even if it's just not raw dollars, your people are better off doing other good things. I was talking to one of our cloud companies very recently, and between Black Friday and Cyber Monday, some of their customer base, the workloads increased by 25x, and then they spike back down. Right? There's no way you can build your own infrastructure to have that kind of elasticity. You need to be in a very large cloud to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, do you mind if I ask Anshul a question about something? So this trend of building out hyperscale clouds and people moving to one of them, in our case, it's one of them. I think it's very clear. I think it continues. But this trend of abstracting away a hyperscale cloud and companies providing this degree of abstraction on top of it seems to be a real trend. And I think it's a real hedge thing that many companies would want. I don't want it at LinkedIn. We have no need for it. But many companies would want it. Are you seeing any of that?
Well, I think it looks good on paper. I'm multi-cloud and I've developed everything. I can move from one to the other and so on. But the cost of moving to the cloud or developing and scaling with the cloud and moving from one cloud provider to the other is actually quite huge. It's not that trivial. So as a result of in practice, what we see most of the larger enterprises do is sign a deal with a primary provider. That's their strategic partner for the next 5 years, 10 years. They'll have a secondary provider as well. Generally, for cost reasons, you can sort of price out both of them and make sure that you keep the ecosystem in check. But they're really committed to at least one in a big way. Trying to do 2 or 3, the overhead within the company is quite large. And then today, as you very well know, the cloud infrastructure is not completely interchangeable. The set of the services and libraries that Amazon provides versus Azure versus GCP are different. So once you've developed to one, you stick with one. And looking at my own software team, we have some services we provide to enterprise customers from the cloud. And if I tell them, hey, my new enterprise customers now want a different cloud provider as the backend, they said, it's going to take me 2 years. Please don't talk about it. I don't think it's that easy.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think that's well said. Raghu, I want to come back to the comment you made about sort of batch and streaming data and the convergence there. That's definitely a massive, macro trend, and the recent battles between Snowflake and Databricks and TP and speeds and feeds has really surfaced that, because that's at the core of this battle, which is how do you sort of store data in one place and use it in a couple of different ways. So I'd love for you to unpack that and, as an outside observer in some sense, talk about the Snowflake versus Databricks battle.
Oh, man. I don't know if I will do justice to that very specific question.
And we'll mail you an armored suit after this.
Yeah. Look, the more copies of data you have, the harder it is to maintain all of it. There's enough explosion of data already. Keeping it in multiple places, it's exponential increase in complexity. More stuff to maintain for GDPR compliance, CCPA compliance, and more cost. When you're managing exabytes of data, you're good enough having it in one place with good redundancy. But the biggest thing is engineering productivity. That's what it comes down to, at least for us. Right? This is the primary driver for us to look at convergence. We want to write once and run everywhere. So there is decent movement with projects like Apache Beam. I think it's still decent, not quite where we would want it to be. There's a lot of hope with what is possible with Flink, something that we are looking at very closely at LinkedIn. Seems to be pretty solid for the streaming environment, still evolving in the batch processing environment, but something that we want to look at very closely. Now, when it comes to Lakehouse and what Databricks has going on in bringing data lakes and the BI world together, I think, again, that comes down to cost and productivity. Two different audiences that could sit on a same set of tools, I think would be a big unlock for all companies. I think that's the real thing there. For us, those ideas are very relevant. So it's the same set of ideas. We may not implement them the same way, but the thought is the same. I will not go into Snowflake versus Databricks right now.
Raghu, I want to build on that a little bit. What advice do you? I mean, this is an area that we see a lot of entrepreneurial activity. This notion of, it's a massive mega trend. Like the simplification, the improvement in productivity, the reduction in cost that would come from a world where you could have, event stream and batch data all in the same place, BI versus, transactional data in the same place. Where do you see startup opportunities? What advice do you have for founders, who are on this in this conference looking to start something here?
I think building around a few of these open source projects could be very powerful, right? I think Beam is pretty solid. Like I said, Flink also seems to be pretty solid. Look, companies like LinkedIn may not really buy solutions from startups that build these things, but we are not really the audience for this. We are not the ideal customer for this. This applies to so many things. There are companies that are commercializing open source projects like Pinot, which is an OLAP database. We are not the audience for it.
Yeah.
But there are so many companies out there that could use expertise in deploying these things as like cloud offerings. It could be very, very powerful. Saying that, hey, give us your data once, we will run it at half the cost, and your engineers have to write code once. How amazing would that be for like 95% of Fortune 500? It would be really, really cool.
Well, I think, you're definitely going to get some entrepreneurs pinging you, I think, after this, looking for advice in this space.
I would love to discuss it.
I'm going to move on to sort of talk a little bit about network architectures, Anshul, because we've spent a fair bit of time talking about the explosion in data, the explosion in the needs to process data, but all of this data has to be moved around. And so networking architectures have changed dramatically, and the needs from the network are changing dramatically as we speak. Can you, Anshul, talk a little bit about some of those key changes?
Absolutely. Ashu, over the last 10, 15 years, ever since we've been in the market, we've been driving one specific focus on how do you build this distributed scale, highly resilient network infrastructure. And there are lots of pillars to this. And the journey is no way complete, right? Number one, the networking stack was a very closed proprietary stack in the past. And today you have this separation of the data plane, which is merchant silicon chips. And it goes a long way, because when a customer like Raghu is having issues, you don't have to call me to find out what's going on. The manual is in front of you. You know exactly what happens to packets, and no one can make up stuff. So you don't have to spend days and days figuring out troubleshooting or how to work around the network issues, things like that. That open ecosystem then has gone into the software stack. And it can be expressed either with open source OSs like Sonic, with some of our cloud customers run on our switches. In fact, some of Raghu's workloads might be running on those today already. And have APIs to stream networks to different analytics engines as well. That part can still be revolutionized. Do you know how do people, the average enterprise customer today, how does someone find out that they have an issue? We poll their network every 5 minutes via SNMP. This was designed in the 90s. It just didn't move on. That's the least common denominator. It works with every device out there. So people decide not to upgrade. There's no next gen technology. That was easy. There's a lot of investment in that space. Automation of network infrastructure is a huge topic. We introduced a product called Cloud Vision. This is around 2015, 2016. And one of our key learnings was we were working with the cloud customers, Microsoft and Facebook at that time. And Microsoft had gone live on a large data center with about 220,000 servers that went live in about 6 weeks from the time infrastructure showed up to the time applications were up and running. Now, that sounds great, but the reality is there was about 9 months of work done before that so that we were ready. But it's highly automated. Once you've done it, you can repeat it as many times as you want. Then we talked to Facebook, and Facebook came up with a new model saying for every 10,000 switches, they will only have one engineer to manage that infrastructure. In the enterprise, the ratio is roughly for every 100 switches or routers, you have one network engineer. And some of the legacy enterprises have one engineer for every 72 devices they manage today. He said this has to be solved, right? So we started building automation framework. I can't name this customer, but this one company where we went in, and they're looking at Arista as a whole new stack. But along with that, there's actually an organizational change, a people change you have to bring in on how do you think about automation right from the beginning. Everything from sort of initial provisioning of infrastructure to change control, validation by the security team, and so on. So in this case, with this customer, they've been running a legacy infrastructure, a very large company, with about 600 on-site engineers provided by one of the networking companies, as well as one big outsourced sort of services shop running infrastructure for them. So we met them about 2 years ago. The project got started, and now it's all getting deployed or already deployed. And we said, show us all the steps you have. Can you automate it? And we ended up with 28 engineers needed for the job, not 600.
600 to 28. Well,
right. So
maybe there's some engineers that, Raghu can go hire from those.
I would not recommend those. They should have automated way earlier, right? But this sort of sense of job security, doing things the old way. So you have to break those bad habits and move on. Networking still, I think, has a lot of work cut out for it. I don't know why. I think compute and storage, data sort of analysis, database companies have been, the industry was very competitive, highly sort of motivated to keep on innovating every year, and networking slowed down. So now networking is trying to catch up, and which is a very, very big deal as well. I'd say one other trend, maybe Raghu, you'll have thoughts on this too, which is connecting the enterprise to the cloud is a huge trend. And we think of it as enterprise workloads moving, but as a networking company, I think of this as the internet is getting reshaped. So when you look at the internet, when we were in school studying what is the internet is all these service provider networks connected with each other. These are all big routers by every telco and SP in the world. But if we are teaching our kids what's the internet in 2040, we're not going to say that at all. Maybe even 2030, we'll say internet is how you as a user connects to the cloud. And the cloud is coming closer and closer to you. So the service providers will still have the last mile, so to speak, maybe the last 100 miles, with all of the edge connectivity. But everything else just is moving away, and the cloud backbones are so strong, they take over the world and become the new internet. So investing heavily in those directions as well. I think there's ample disruption opportunity for entrepreneurs in that space too. Anything that was being done legacy way, if you fast forward what the world will look like in 2030, 2040, lots of changes yet to be done.
Anshul, I think you started a thread here. I think that's interesting that I'd like to sort of dig in a little bit more, and Raghu, get your perspective from LinkedIn as well, which is as networks are moving closer to the edge, as more and more applications are moving from private data centers to public data centers, and more employees are accessing work, infrastructure or applications at work from their homes. You're seeing lots of performance issues on one hand and security issues on another hand. I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a complete reinvention of how we think about networks and how do we sort of think about the last mile, including the last mile. Raghu, what are you seeing? I mean, you have all these engineers that are working from home, and what are you guys doing about solving this problem?
The transition from working from the office to working from home obviously happened very rapidly for all of us. I really wish we were operating in a zero trust environment. We're still in a VPN world.
Yeah.
Right? That really sucks. Like, legitimately sucks. Don't want to be there. There are a few companies that have done zero trust rather well. We want to be there. We improve things from a place where all the traffic from our employees' computer would go through the VPN channel, and then we were like, okay, with this, we started doing tunnels, which improved things. But transitioning to zero trust, I think, is the way to go, because hybrid work is here to stay.
Yep.
At least we have fully embraced that. So identity-based security is the way to go. So we're investing in it. I wish we were already there. So that is definitely something that comes to mind from a work from home transition standpoint. But for the broader question around connectivity to the public cloud, I think POPs, I think that infrastructure is pretty solid around the world already. I think it is only getting better. We over the last few years have built a bunch of POPs in different parts of the world where I think it has made considerable difference to the way we serve our members and customers with performance. But we also started leveraging Azure's POP presence, like an order of magnitude more than what we have at LinkedIn. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. There's a different aspect to this that Anshul touched on, that is connectivity from our private data centers into the public cloud.
Yep.
I think it's okay right now. I wish we had a ton more bandwidth, like a ton more bandwidth to shuttle data around, right? We want to shuttle around exabytes of data. We are not there yet. Even if we are able to egress that amount of data, there is no ability to push so many bits over the wire and ingress it in a different system. I think there's an order of magnitude more improvement that I think is possible there, and I hope it happens.
Right. No, Raghu, you're absolutely correct. Today, the fastest way to send an exabyte of data is called FedEx.
Yeah.
FedEx the disk. But even across country, there is actually a lot of innovation happening in this space. And largely driven by initially video streams. We have customers in different states where the police force streams their webcam live directly into the cloud. That way the policeman cannot interfere with the feed and so on, right? There's a lot of compliance on the back end for that. But the industry that really pushed this to the limit has actually been the auto industry. So you have all these self-driving cars, right? They have 2 terabyte or 8 terabyte disks within each car. The car gets charged, it comes back to the parking lot. Now you need to stream all that data back, because the cell phone networks are never going to be big enough to stream so much data in one go. So there's a lot of work going on in building fiber connectivity directly between these sort of parking garages to the POPs and then directly to the cloud as well. In the past, just 5 years ago or 8 years ago, you could carry about 10 gigabits per lambda per wavelength in a fiber. You can mux maybe 50 or even 100 of them together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this actually was pioneered. We worked on a project with Microsoft Azure, where we switched quickly to standard IP technology, carrying 100 gig per lambda, same fiber infrastructure. So you suddenly now get 10 terabits per fiber pair. And now in 2020, 2021 timeframe, we moved to 400 gig with something called ZR technology, doing something very similar. And 800 gig and 1.6 terabyte Ethernet for these use cases are right around the corner. So in roughly 15 years, we're going to go from 10 gigabits per lambda to 1.6 terabits per lambda. And that pace of innovation has never been there. It may not be in the world it has, but I think it's at a very fast pace right now. We'll catch up on the next slide.
That's very cool. That is quite a remarkable achievement, Anshul. I have some audience questions coming in, so I'm going to jump back and forth. I think this is one for you, Anshul. It's about smart NICs and how smart NICs reduce the gap between compute and network, and the fact that several startups have raised substantial amounts of money. And the question from the audience is, do you think that these companies can be large standalone companies, or will the large cloud providers subsume the smart NIC startups?
Yeah, so I think every large cloud company already has 3 different groups internally building their own smart NICs. So if they are buying from these companies, they do have a need, and they will continue to buy as a customer. Unlikely that there'll be more direct immediate acquisitions here. But having said that, smart NICs is a term that was coined almost like to say this is the next gen thing, but these are just different types of offloads built into the NIC. Offloads have been around for a very long time, since the SCSI days and TCP offloads and so on. So this is not that different. If anyone's trying to enter this space, the biggest challenge is actually go-to-market, not technology, because the needs are fairly clear. The different types of overlays, different types of tunnels, different types of offloads you need, whether it's for RDMA or other technologies. But to be a NIC company, in the end, you're going to stay closer to the server. So your distribution channel becomes server companies, but cloud companies don't buy from the standard server companies. They build on their own. And you have to be part of that ecosystem. So unless you're part of a co-development effort directly with the cloud titans, it's extremely hard to win in this space. So my thinking is that most of these companies will not see success because of the go-to-market type of challenges. And like any other industry, the top 1 or 2 innovators will take away all the share. The remaining 8 get nothing. So there's no fun in being number 9. So unless you have an idea where you're going to be significantly better than everyone else out there, I would stay away. But if you have that idea, then certainly go for it.
Thanks, Anshul. My takeaway from that comment was, since I haven't invested in any smart NICs companies, is run the hell away. But as we start to wrap up, I wanted to sort of zoom out of the specifics and maybe, ask both of you a similar question, that as you look 3 to 5, and actually more 5 to 8 years out, and you think about the implications of some of these trends that we talked about, where do you see startup opportunities? If you had to pick, 1 or 2 or 3 very specific startup opportunities where you think, hey, Anshul, in your case, if Jayashree wouldn't kill you and would let you sort of jump out back into the startup field and start again, what would you start? Just as a hypothetical question, what are the kinds of things that you think the next $100 billion companies will get created around? And literally anything that you can think of. I'll start with you, Raghu, and we can go back and forth. So you can start with one, and we can go to Anshul and come back to you again.
Go ahead, Raghu.
So I'll actually do 2, if that's okay. So
please.
Given how much I've spoken about data management, probably doesn't come as a surprise that I would do something in the data management space. I think that space is so fertile. There is a lot to do there, and I think infrastructure can be a real unlock there. One specific thing I'll say here, something that we are investing heavily in, is graph infrastructure, like scale out graph infrastructure. We are one of the few companies in the world that has a need for it, but I think it becomes main scale over the next few years. And I think that helps with data management at extreme scale, with metadata management, et cetera, et cetera. Think about it as global secondary index on exabytes of data. Extremely powerful, can be expensive. I think those costs will get driven down, but that is something I would look at. The second one is, to make sure all of us have jobs for the foreseeable future. We go through these trends of centralization versus decentralization. We are in one phase right now, where everyone's moving to hyperscale clouds. I think in a few years, I think it'll reverse. I think there's going to be hybrid clouds, which is going to be very real. I think Anshul already spoke about some of it. Sovereign clouds are already very real today. That level of Roman writing, which I know Anshul said is really, really hard right now. We're going through that right now. By the way, this is a phrase I borrowed from folks at Netflix that I chatted with early on before we kicked off our migration. Running on-prem and on the public cloud at the same time, pain in the ass, extremely hard. Companies that can make Roman writing easier, and there is so much value there. I would pay a lot of money to get rid of a bunch of problems there. So those are two things.
That's great. So you have two ideas. Again, I'm going to start a business plan competition for each of those, Raghu. Pull you in as a judge. Anshul, what about you?
Sure. Well, actually, I agree with Raghu. There's a lot of opportunity here. In addition to these, I would say there's some more insecurity, especially when you look at the hybrid cloud, private cloud space. I think that space is not fully covered. We say we want to be on a zero trust model, but the challenge is we have to trust the employees, right? You can have 2-factor, 3-factor, 10-factor authentication, but if the employee is a bad actor, then what do you do? So to solve those types of problems, I think security still needs a little bit more coverage in that domain, not the rest. The rest already, I think, there's a lot of good technology. Another area where I'm seeing the cloud company get ahead, but the rest of the struggle is AI. So I think if companies, not building new GPUs, but if you can leverage existing technology infrastructure and give models to enterprises on how to build their training model, maybe Raghu, this is part of the graph technology you're talking about, right? You need some of this in the enterprises as well as a service, because then they're not going to write code using open source libraries on their own. So you have to help them with an entire solution that truly leverages and optimizes their business. I think there's ample opportunity there as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Anshul and Raghu. Those are 4 great opportunities for entrepreneurs in the audience to pursue. And thank you for what's been a fabulous conversation on the future of the infrastructure stack.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
Ashwin.